Hi, and welcome back to the panel room. I'm your host, Jim Nettles, and tonight it's time to strap on those boots and get ready to go into action. We're going to be here to talk about writing in the military. What do we get right? What do we get wrong? And based on the pre-show banner here, we're all going to be seeing some action. But let's see who all has decided to join in this evening. So, Rachel.
Absolutely. Hi, I'm Rachel A. Brune, and I am a speculative fiction author as well as a publisher. I publish horror anthologies with Crone Girls Press, and I recently became the senior editor for Falstaff Books' horror imprint, Falstaff Dread. However, my very first paid writing gig was when I joined the Army in 2001, October 2nd, as what was then called a 46 Quebec, which was a military journalist and public affairs specialist. Yep, I was telling the Army story, and to a certain extent, I still am.
Jack?
Sorry, did you say October 2nd, 2001?
Yes.
So like right after September 11th.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm Jack Cullen. I write an urban fantasy series called Recollections of a Rune Knight, and I'm going to be writing a sci-fi alien abduction action comedy for Evolve Publishing. First book comes out this year called Lost Galactic Mess. I joined the Air Force right out of high school. My first day was Friday the 13th. I get out after Desert Storm. I was out for about 10 years. I wound up being a rescue worker at Ground Zero after 9/11. I went back home, walked in the Army recruiting station, signed back up, and did another stint.
Miski?
Hi, I'm Miski Harris. I write romance. My flagship series, Don't Ask, Don't Tell. It tells the stories of military characters. I am Air Force. I had a classified job that required me to write manpower plans for wartime. So I got to know a lot of what happened to my fellow airmen during the "if we catch you, we're going to make you wish you were dead," and then during the infamous "Don't Ask, Don't Tell." And so my goal, now that I'm beyond my security clearance, is to bring some of those stories, those men and women, well, primarily men, to life, and give them some retribution.
Siera?
Hi, everybody. I'm Siera London, a contemporary romance author. I also do some urban fantasy and police procedurals. I spent 23 years in the United States Navy as a pediatric nurse practitioner. I retired out of San Diego back in 2013. At the height of my career, I was a healthcare executive, and I managed 17 clinics across 3 states. And let's see, I'm a hybrid author. My best-selling series is The Lunchtime Chronicles. I'm the creator of that series, and I have a small-town romance coming out with Forever. First book releases next March. Title is Fake It Till You Make It.
And Janine?
Hi, I'm Janine K. Spendlove. I just retired after 22 years in the Marine Corps in about 6 months ago. And I was a C-130 pilot with multiple combat deployments. The last one I was in command for. And my last job was I was a political military strategist for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. So I retired out of the Pentagon. And I write speculative fiction. I think I'm most well known for my War of the Seasons YA fantasy series, but I also did some Star Wars tie-in fiction, just a short story, but I'm not going to say just, like, it's still to me like, oh, I wrote Star Wars. But And it was really cool the way they promoted it. They were like, hey, if you want to write, really good military, fiction, who do you bring in? You send in the Marines. That was like their whole tagline when they interviewed me for StarWars.com. I was just like, oh my gosh, it was really cool. And the timing of it was wild. It was right as I was preparing to take my own detachment of Marines forward into combat. So trying to get this story kicked out to them and focus on preparing my Marines for deployment. I'm currently shopping around my most recent novel, which is a military sci-fi retelling of Pride and Prejudice. So, hey, if any of you are agents or publishers out there and want to look at it, just let me know. But that's, and if you hear any weird snorts, grumbles, snoring, I have 2 pugs and they are very loud.
Congrats on retirement.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. First thing I did was I went in and I was like, give me a haircut I never could have had in the Marine Corps. And they like shaved the sides, undercut. I went purple hair. I get my nails done now. Like fully, forever. I love being a Marine. I'll always be a Marine. My dad calls me Janine the Marine. Like it's indelibly, tattooed on my heart. But there were things I missed. So
the first thing I did was go blonde.
Yes. So
I did.
So let's actually start out from a storytelling standpoint. Where would you start for somebody that wants to write about the military in whatever setting? But if you were going to go with that first piece of advice for somebody who is trying to set up and tell a military story, whether they have experience or not, where would you tell them to start? So Rachel, okay, Janine, no, you raise that hand. You
no, I don't want to butt in. You wanted to go to Rachel.
No,
You're the moderator. I will have my turn.
Honestly, I would tell them to go find themselves 1 or 2 veterans, not just one, but like 1 or 2, sit down with them and the beverage of their choice and be like, listen, I'm writing a military story and I need to know how to get it right. Has there ever been anything you've ever wanted to tell a writer on how to get the military right? And several hours later, you may need to schedule another date, because I find that most people who are in the military have very strong opinions on the fiction that portrays us and would love to help you get it right.
Jack, I'm going to catch you mid-chug.
I would say enlist you, hippie. No, that's a perfect answer. Find a veteran, talk to them. With the internet these days, you can research it, but research. Don't just assume that every branch is the same as the other, because we're not, and we use a lot of different terms.
Miski, anything
even inside our branches, like I got to tell you, the aviation community and the grunt community and the Marine Corps, very, very different. And just inside aviation, like we make fun of rotor trash, we make fun of the jet jocks, like there's even subcultures in the subcultures.
C-130, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, bus driver.
No, aerial refueler, gas station attendant, slightly more classy.
Oh, okay. All right.
My first piece of advice is pick a service. Jacking off what you said. First of all, even in one branch of the service, there are so many different segments. It's like being in the world's largest high school. There's a clique for everything. Yeah. For instance, I was always in a detachment, and which meant that I worked for the headquarters of whatever portion of the service I was attached to. So it was Tactical Air Command, headquarters, and we answered to the Secretary of the Air Force. It's a very short chain. And the joke was you either go up in stars or crash in flames. A lot of people think, especially when you write, I write MM, and people don't understand why a gay man or a lesbian woman would join the military. If you're going to write MM, you need to get the answer to that question. And there's only one way you're going to get an honest answer. It's like Jack said, you need to talk to somebody who is doing what you write about. My son is a flaming hetero, but I needed a para jumper. And I interviewed my own son for 2 days to get it right. As a critical care nurse, I had the injuries down, but what that stuff really means. I have a friend who wrote about, who has a Navy story coming out, and he was talking about 2 guys, making out in an alleyway in Korea. And I had to keep telling him from 16 different directions. At that time in the 80s, that did not happen the way you wrote it. Your books won't sell if all it takes is for one military person to read your book and call it a lie, and you're done.
Yeah.
I would say before you even approach a veteran, have an idea of what you want to write. Because a veteran isn't a veteran isn't a veteran. We're not interchangeable like that. Most of us are very specialized at what we do. And so to really get it accurate, you need to have an idea of what your storyline is. And basic, like the rank structure. There are certain details you can give a character that may be more associated with an officer rank or a listed rank, yes. Or you can make certain assumptions. You can have someone that's an officer, but you could have an enlisted personnel who could be, sergeant major of the Army, and they have influence over the whole, the entire structure, and actually have more power and influence than yes. someone that's an officer. So you need to know what you're writing and, understand the basic rank structure. And I think then you can go and, talk to someone in uniform, because then you can really tailor what you're looking for and, get more accurate information so that you can really build a story where, readers can suspend belief about everything else. But, you got the details right about your character and the story you're trying to tell. So have some idea where you're going before you start interviewing people.
Janine, anything?
If I may, include beta readers in those stories.
Yes, later in the process.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Include beta readers. I think that never has a beta reader been more important than getting a veteran or active duty person's point of view when they read your story, preferably somebody that's doing what your character is involved in.
Janine, anything you want to throw in on top?
Oh, yes. My call sign is ATIS. It stands for Automated Terminal Information Service. It's a pilot thing. It's really funny, but what it means is I don't stop talking. So you can Google it. It's a real thing. Anyway, my point is, this is a question I get asked a lot, and I actually have a slightly different answer than what everybody else has given. I don't disagree with their answers. I think they're very good answers, but I also think that it really depends on what the person is writing. I have had a lot of friends come to me and say, I'm really scared. I want to write military sci-fi, but I'm not in the military, or I'm a pacifist, or, any number of things. And I'm just like, that's fine. Unless you're going to write about a historical battle, or you're going to write about contemporary times or something in modern history, your Space Marines are your Space Marines. And if you want to call them, if you want to have intermixed rank structure where you've got like a commander and a general and it's all and like that hurts my brain. It makes me twitchy, but like this, your fantasy world. I don't care what you do. You have to create a structure that makes sense for you and for your military. And so what I tell them to do is they need to study history. They need to study the history of warfare and not just like European history. They need, and I say this recognizing, you know, I have a bachelor's degree in history. I also have a master's degree in history. I was very fortunate that the Marine Corps sent me to Johns Hopkins to get, you know, I studied military strategy and history to become the military strategist that I was. And in that, it furthered my, well, I love history, so I was nerding out over that, but it really furthered my understanding of how much this really drives the fact that the nature of warfare does not change. Right. The character of warfare changes. The way we fight changes, but the nature of warfare, what it is, does not change. It doesn't change whether you're writing about space aliens who may look like Jell-O. Warfare is the nature of warfare is the same. They're still trying to kill more of your guys than you're trying to kill their guys because you're trying to submit them to your will. That is the ultimate point of warfare. And so whether you're writing about space aliens or magic battles in a fantasy world, or you're writing about modern day warfare, the nature is the same. The way they will fight will be different. The character of warfare is different, but ultimately warfare, it's the same across the ages, the base part of it. So get a good aspect of that. And then if you can, go walk a battlefield. Like I studied Gettysburg out the wazoo. I watched the movie. I did everything, but it wasn't until I went with a bunch of Marines and we, no kidding, walked around Gettysburg and each of us talking about different parts of it and explaining it. Same with Burnside's Bridge when we went down there. Like I'd read about it and I thought I understood it. And then as I was sitting there looking at it, like he legitimately tried to lead his guys. Like, no wonder everybody died. Like they were sitting ducks, like, because you could physically see the battlefield. So, and I'm actually really excited because this May I get to go to Italy to help advise the newest cohort of students going through the program I went through and help them go through one of the World War II battlefields there as part of like their capstone thing. So I know I sound like a really big nerd right here, and maybe not everybody is going to be as passionate about me, but I guarantee, like, just go outside and walk in nature. Try to imagine what a battle there would be like. And that's just talking about the tactical and the operational aspect of it. We haven't even gotten into like the strategy aspect of it. Anyways, so that's what I tell people. It all depends on what you're trying to write. Unless you're trying to replicate actual history or current events, like writing a story about two men kissing in Korea in the 80s, like maybe not publicly. You need to understand what you're writing about. But if you're writing a fantasy world or some sci-fi world, go nuts.
Yeah. If they were in space and they were on the planet, you know, Taiwan, fine. But I find that especially, you know, we have, as a matter of fact, they actually have their own designation, Iraqi war veterans and Desert Storm veterans. I mean, these people all went through some stuff, and PTSD is a real thing. You just, you know, if after you do your research, you need to really make it fiction, like you said. I like the idea of like create your own world.
Siera, you had a question?
I really just wanted to piggyback on what Janine was saying, and that is going back to understanding what you're writing, because the military, yes, we all support the war fighters, but there's more than just the warfighter in the service.
Mhm.
And so if you're writing about that, of course, you want to go back and try to get your details as accurate as possible, depending on whether you're writing contemporary or not, even if you're fictionalizing it. Because that's going to help to ground the reader, but also realizing that there are other support corps outside of the warfighter as well when you talk about writing military romance. So it's more than just the warfighters.
That's why I said pick one. I had a friend who wrote, it was a beautiful book, but she had the Army in there and she had the Marines in there, and she and I'm trying to remember if it was Navy or Air Force. I think it was Air Force. All these services operate differently because they have a different mission, plain and simple. They,
and that's
we don't
actually
have
where
a bunch of services just because it's a cool thing to do. And you can take people out of the story, trying to bring. There is a such thing as too much realism. Pick one, pick a job, and move out from there. You can write stories for the rest of your life. Just pick one, pick a job, and write.
Well, and that kind of goes with where I wanted to go next, which is the idea of getting an understanding that there are different branches of the military and they all serve different roles. There may be crossovers. There's a lot of different functional, and there's also a lot of jobs within the military by branch. And there's, again, a lot of crossover. So I was going to start with Jack on this one. So from a branch perspective, because again, you served in a couple of branches, what guidance would you give somebody about the branches you've been in and how that would affect the story?
Well, I mean, there's more crossover now than there used to be. When I deployed as part of Enduring Freedom, I was in a military police unit, and the two platoons that I was in were merged with Air Force security forces. We had the same mission, and it literally was, you would have a fire team that could be 2 soldiers and 1 airman. So there is more mixture than it used to be. When I was in the Air Force way back in the older days when I had hair, very, very separate. So things do change. But yeah, I mean, the missions are different, but at the end of the day, it's protecting the U.S. or serving the U.S.'s mission. It really comes down to the story. If one of the things I want to touch back on what we discussed earlier was, it's also going to depend on what timeline you're writing in, because things change. Like I said, they were more separate, but also so does equipment, things along those lines. I've done 30 years in law enforcement. Most of the people I work with are veterans. I've worked with Iraqi veterans, Desert Storm veterans, Afghan veterans. I've worked with Vietnam veterans. I even worked with a Korean vet who was probably one of the toughest people I ever worked with. Some of them had MREs for lunch. Some of them had C-rats. Some of them had K-rats. Everything changes. So, look at the timeline as well as the branches, but, know that, the Army's generally probably going to catch a ride with the Air Force. The Marines are going to catch a ride with the Navy. Not always.
I take myself.
Well, yeah, you take yourself. But once again,
joking aside, do you know what Marine stands for? My bottom, the A word, rides in Navy equipment.
Okay.
Sir.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, the Marines I worked with, none of them were in aviation, right? They usually did floats. So how did they travel the world? They did it on a Navy ship. But that's part of the thing right there. If you got to do something like that, where you're talking about the Marines, what part of the Marines? Would you take a C-130? Would you take a ship? How does it go? So it can't just be, oh, this guy's Air Force, so he flies jets. And I literally, when I get back from, I was fire protection in the Air Force, right? It was basically a firefighter. I was the guy in the big silver suit that went and hosed down the plane that was on fire. I literally had a classmate who couldn't understand that. He's like, so what, does the water shoot out of your plane? He thought everybody in the Air Force flew planes. And he wasn't a dumb person. He just didn't have the concept to it. So do more research than simply say, hey, my character was in the Air Force. What did he do? Well, he did Air Force stuff. Well, what? So, look more into it, find out what the MOS is, find out what MOS stands for, and do the research. And, everything everyone said earlier about who to talk to, how to research, was all good stuff. But no, yes, there are differences in the branches, and yes, sometimes they do overlap as well.
Miski?
I'm sorry. One of my biggest memories, and as a matter of fact, I'm very proud to be the mother of a Marine. But I remember when the towers went down. And I want to say the worst day of my life. I was standing outside on Long Island and I saw an F-15 fly overhead. And I was like, get in the car. We got to find the radio. Because I knew that an F-15 flying overhead on Long Island meant there was a problem. I knew that because I helped write that war plan. I really can't say anything more than everybody has added. Because if I don't know how to go any further than you just really have to do your research. You really have to talk to people. I never once was deployed with other airmen. I always had to go out at dark 30 with the Marines because they were usually the first ones in country. And so when my son started talking about shellback, I thought he was crazy. I was like, what do you mean shellback? What are you talking about? But apparently that's a thing that happens when you cross the Mediterranean. So Marines don't always hitch a ride with the Navy because all the Marines I knew flew. And me, I hated planes. I hated flying. I was given flight honors. In other words, I could go up in an AWACS and I turned it down and gave it to somebody else. There are a lot of things that people believe. I was a nurse but I wasn't a nurse on active duty. However, I got to know those men and women, and it's not like MASH on TV. They don't have time for all that craziness that goes on TV, because even if it's not wartime, and I'm one of those vets, I came in between because the things that I was deployed to, the country didn't even know there was fighting going on. Can you imagine my surprise landing in Korea and finding out they were still at war? I was like, wait a minute, the Korean War ended before I was born. What are we doing? But it didn't. So
yeah, it's still an armistice.
I'm telling you. And every year in the spring, the Marines get shifted up to the 39th, 49th parallel. The Army goes to Itaewon. Again, we all have our jobs. And then there's little old me having to get in a Jeep in a country where women don't drive and visit all these spaces. So you really have to pick a story. And I guess that's really all I can.
Siera?
Wow, it's kind of a loaded question, but I really think it goes back to, and I think we all have said this in many different ways, the story you're trying to tell. Depending on what your specialty is, you may have more more partners. If you're working on a joint task force, like if you look at a place like down in Key West, my husband was a SWO, so a surface warfare officer. So they work very closely with the Marines. So if you're structuring a story where, it's on an amphibious ship, then the likelihood of Navy and Marines working, closely together is high. And it's very, very believable. Like, it's going to help you craft a world that readers who are interested in that story can really relate to. It's going to help to ground them in the story. But you also have joint task force. If you work if you have a character like mine, where I worked in the hospital, we have all the services that work in not the Coast Guard, y'all, but we have Army providers. We don't do that.
That's Homeland Security, anyway.
They're still a part of our sea service family, right? So you have Navy, Marine Corps, and the Coast Guard. So they're still a part of our family. But when you talk about someone with my background in medical or as a healthcare executive, then you're going to have all the branches working together. If you're at the executive level, of course, you're going to be working with the executives across all those services, including your civilian partners in the community. So it really depends on the nature of the story. But I agree with Jack in that you are seeing, and I hate to say this, but kind of that purple force where you see more and more of us working together.
Yeah.
Yes, because resources are tight. And like you said, we all, ultimately, our mission is what? To support and defend, right? The Constitution. So regardless of which service you're in associated with the United States, we all are supporting and defending. And so you'll see more, I think you're seeing more of that integration across the services. So I think it's easier now to write a story that may bring more of the services together, just depending on the storyline and the nature of how you have them working together.
Janine?
As I mentioned, I spent my last 2 years in the Marine Corps on the joint staff. So, I mean, we were purple as purple could be, but it was still very interesting to see how, even though my boss was retired Army, the director of where I worked was initially Marine and then Navy, a Navy admiral. And then above that was initially Army, but then became Navy and then became Air Force, and the chairman was Army, but before him was Marine. And in my office mates in the division the country and the division I specifically worked in, was three other Air Force and another Marine. So it was me and another Marine. And it was very interesting learning things because the Air Force colonel that I worked for would be like, "Hey, Adis, could you blah, blah, blah?" And I'd be like, "Why are you asking me? Like, you're my boss. Just give me a task and I will do it."
Yeah.
You don't need to ask me for a favor. No.
Yes, I agree.
Air Force. It's like, Air Force.
What was the question? I mean, it's just anything like, "Hey, Adis, I need you to work on, do you mind working on binders for the chairman? Like, just tell me to work on binders. Like, don't ask me."
Right.
And then the other thing that would happen is, particularly during the trials we had over the last couple of years, we were working an alternate work schedule because we could not afford to have everyone in our office get sick, given the office we specifically worked in. It was very sensitive. And so one day it was me and the other Marine, and we were very frustrated about a thing, and we were working on these things that we had to get to the chairman, and we were like, rah, 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 and being Marines because there was no other Marines around. So we were just being Marines. And we hear this quiet knock on the vault. And one of the Air Force majors pops his head in. "Are you guys okay?" And we're like, "We're just talking." "You're screaming at each other." "No, we're not. We're just talking." Like, "We're fine. Like, this is normal." So it was just, so we might be joint, but I watched even at the highest levels, like I would be sitting, not talking because I would just be sitting against the wall watching all these 3 and 4 stars of various branches, talking around the table. And you're just like, oh, wow, they are talking past each other, or they are talking around each other, or there is some definite like stovepiping of culturalism here. Like the army guys are backing the army guys and the lone sailor is just like whatever. And it was wild. Ultimately, the job still gets done, but it was interesting to see how much we are a product of our culture. All that to say is, even if you're writing about space aliens, bear that in mind. You're going to have cultures within cultures within cultures, because that other Marine I worked with was a grunt. And it was interesting to see because the Air Force guys were all pilots. And so there was a little bit about like Marines versus the Air Force, but then also a little bit of pilots versus the grunt, like, because they would still do pilot talk and be like, hey, it is blah, 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 blah. And so, because we will give our little microcultures, we'll do this, but the second you come after us, we'll turn on you and like join forces against. So I will always defend anyone in the military, but I have no problems taking pot shots at them either.
It's like siblings. It really is. You'll fight among themselves, and then you go after the family. Everybody turns on that person.
You can't say anything nasty about any of my siblings or my parents, but I sure can.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. And the other thing, you brought up such an excellent point, Janine, and that's that every service kind of has its culture, right? And you do want to be very deliberate about the tone, because depending on which service you're writing about, you want to get it right, because I can tell you this is something where we will get offended.
Yes.
and we will act out. So very much so. The Marines do not ask. The Navy, we do not ask. We give orders. And we expect them to be followed. My son is in the Air Force. He is a different type of.
Right? And the amount of colonels who'd be like, "Hey, call me so and so," and I'd be like, "Yes, sir."
But it depends on.
You're a lieutenant colonel. It's okay. You can call me by my first name. Yes, sir.
Yes.
It's also depends on what part of the Air Force.
Only the Air Force.
For instance. The Air Force is in itself a college. And so
they do call their barracks dorms.
And we call our barracks dorms. However, as a staff sergeant, I was paid to tell generals no, no, and, reply again in 30 days for further refusal. However, coming up right behind me could be a tech sergeant from civil engineers, and he'd get his behind chewed off. So it also depended on where you were in the mission. We made our pilots cocky because we wanted them to believe they could fly into bullets and not get hit. Otherwise, think about this. We got a 20-year-old in a $1 million airplane, and we're telling him to fly directly at somebody who's shooting at him. We took this kid out of college. So it ultimately, and the Air Force, out of all the branches, tends to get painted with one brush a lot. I was fortunate. I got to see much more of the Air Force. Usually, whatever your MOS or AFSC is, that's kind of where your focus stays for your 20 years. I came to learn that all Marines are not grunts, and they don't all land on the beach. As a matter of fact, a very young Marine kept me from getting killed in Korea. I came to learn that everybody in the Navy isn't sailing on a ship. Who knew? So one of the things that will sort of, twist my knickers is when somebody is writing and they perpetuate a myth. Mm-hmm. in the MM community, the same person that was writing a Navy story, he says, well, my friend told me you go into the Navy straight, but when you come off a float, you're definitely gay. And I said, please introduce me to this man and then get out of my way. Because my father was Navy and he didn't go down one way and come up another. And, because I got to work with different branches at a time when I'm trying to be careful, at a time when there was a need for us to start learning to coexist. I took offense at that. So, one of the things I think I want new writers to know is don't perpetuate the myth. Don't assume because somebody said it that makes it true.
So Rachel, I was going
to say there's definitely times where I've been talking to somebody and they'll say like a catchphrase or they'll say something that I know immediately they've heard a couple of vets joking about, but the person who's been either eavesdropping or listening to the conversation puts way more weight on it than they really should. It was a couple of people like shooting the breeze and having a mutual joke, which we have a lot of in-jokes in the military. And the person was like, aha, I have found that key phrase that will make my writing show that I have done my research. And then they, like I said, they put a lot of load bearing, they make that phrase do a lot of load bearing for them. I also kind of wanted to throw this out there because we've been talking about different branches, et cetera, et cetera. And this is kind of going back to something that Janine said before, which is looking at historical context. In the more, I guess, modern age, because I refuse to believe that I'm old, and the last 20 years is definitely the modern age, we've seen this strategic shift to deploying a lot more reserves, right? So in previous combats or in previous wars, there was drafts, there were huge enlistment drives, there were mostly drafts, actually. Let's just go with that. And so you didn't really necessarily need a huge reserve force. And the ones that you had did not really get deployed a whole lot. And in the, starting in 2001 and then moving on, the reserve was that strategic force that was used quite a lot.
I'd say, actually, Desert Storm is when that started.
Okay.
We had a lot of Guard Reserve that deployed as part of Desert Storm, and the active duty stayed on their bases. It was crazy. But sorry, interrupted. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, you're right. You're right. And so I feel like that's something that if someone is putting together, even if they're putting together like a fantasy or science fiction, it's something to just keep in mind. Is your military force, do they have enough people to go and fight a war that could kick off? Or do they need to draw from a strategic reserve? There's definitely, so I started off as a reservist, and then I went active duty. So I was reserve enlisted specialist, then sergeant, then I went on active duty, and I was like, this is great, but you know what? I could be doing other things too. Went to ROTC, got commissioned, spent some more time on active duty, and I'm now currently a drilling reservist. And so I've had the chance to kind of see the differences in both the culture and the training and the resources that the Army Reserve, as opposed to the active Army component, have. And through my work, either as a journalist or just getting assigned to see getting assigned to different units and then getting to see how they've worked, there can be differences. You could have a reserve unit that's flush, right? They might have a specific mission. They may be attached to a certain unit and they got lots of money. And then you go to another unit and they're like driving, vehicles that honestly should have been turned in 10 years ago. So there's definitely things to think about as a writer, if you're going to be doing these long wars, how are they fought? Do you have mass conscription, or do you have a reserve of folks who come on active duty every couple of years? And then one last thing to kind of think about is where in that mix of branches and components do you put in things that might be comparable to, say, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which is very much a different kind of Army organization. Or if you have a situation such as a Korean setting, or an enduring freedom or Iraqi freedom setting, how are your Army or Marines or whoever you've got, how are they interacting with host nation soldiers or host nation partners? Are you interacting with the elite host nation forces? Or are you all just kind of like sustainment bubbas and, doing the best thing that you can and trying to repair all of the crap that the elite forces keep breaking?
So we've covered a lot of ground, and we barely scratched the surface. I mean, there's a lot of other things that we're going to have to do this again and keep diving into it. But I want to make sure we all kind of get that one last piece here. There's a tremendous amount here, but we all have that one thing we think somebody needs to know. If you're working on crafting story, whether you're working on characters, whether it's just the thing you're like, whatever it is, please do not do this. It's that one trope or that one thing you see done wrong every time, and it grabs anybody that's in the service and it yanks you straight out of it. So I want you to kind of think about what that is for you, whichever way you want to go. This is a wide open question, which is going to get me in trouble, but I'm going to start with you, Miski, on this one. What's the one thing that you think that somebody who is wanting to write something in a military setting needs to know?
I'm going to tailor mine down. If you're writing an LGBTQ story, don't dive in without knowing the time, the history, and the truth. I think the thing that just really torques my jaws is when I see someone writing something that perpetuates a myth. So I guess my one thing is don't assume.
Siera?
Okay, this is probably the most difficult question you've asked tonight, but
You're welcome.
Yeah, your prize is in the mail. I will say, be careful about romanticizing war and loss, especially be mindful of real world events, current day, and how your story can impact your reader. I know we are our first readers, but there was a Twitter post going around as early as yesterday talking about, current time, real world events that are impacting people, whether it's social justice or Blue Lives or police or SEALs and people dying away from home and, hopping from country to country and people dying away from home and not here on U.S. soil. These are very real issues. As writers, oftentimes we shed light on issues that are important in everyday life. So just be respectful of that and, handle the issues that you raise in your book with responsibility and with care. That's what I'll say.
Janine?
Siera teed me up perfectly for what I wanted to talk about. Thank you. War, as she said, don't romanticize it. War is ugly, war is violent, war is horrific, and war is awful. There's nothing romantic about it. And it does horrific, awful things for the people who survive it, whether they are service members or people who are caught in the middle of it. When you are discussing the trauma that happens and the after effects, you need to know that just as you've seen in this panel, every one of us is different. We all have a very different experience of our time in service. We're all in different branches. We all had different jobs. That's what MOS is. And PTSD presents differently in every person. And that trope I hate is the person who, cracks and goes psycho and like starts killing people. Like,
Yes.
I'm not going to say that doesn't happen, but like, I mean, maybe that's like 1%. I don't know. I'm just pulling a number out. So I did not jump into another job. I'm going to start applying for jobs here in the next month or so. But I purposely took a year off so that I could have time to decompress and start addressing my own issues. I have had PTSD since my first deployment in 2006, and it has not gotten better. And I kept thinking it had just gone away or would go away because, you're so busy, you ignore it, right? Like, and, a couple months ago, it hit me really hard and I was not okay, and reached out to a bunch of friends and found out that like the timing for when it hit me was a lot of my Marine friends. And so the VA has really great things for veterans. And so I now go to weekly counseling with a group because that is what I need. I don't do so well with one-on-one. I'm not enjoying making myself vulnerable right now to all of you and to a bunch of strangers, but I feel like it's important. And what I'm getting at, though, is I sit in this group of all of us who are all very different. And there are people who have served only a few years. There are people who are Gulf War vets. There are people who are Iraq or Afghanistan vets. There are people who never deployed, but we all have our own trauma and we're all very different. And the PTSD pronounces differently for all of us. There's some crossover. That's why the group is great for me. But what I'm getting at is I got asked to do an anthology, a military sci-fi anthology several years ago. And they asked me specifically to write a story on PTSD. And I was like, oh gosh. So I did. And I wrote my experience of it on how it first started presenting for me. And I remember I've never yelled at an editor or told them I would pull my story. This was the first time because they came back to me and they said, well, this is really boring. This is not at all what PTSD is like. And this was something that was I'd never written anything so personal in my life. And I basically was like, excuse you. And was like, just because I'm not ranting and raving, just because things happened a bit more quietly for me, because I was not publicly suffering, because this is how it was affecting me and my life and my view of the world was completely changed and skewed. Like, this is very real. And so once they got that and they realized, oh, you wrote about yourself, because I didn't tell them that, they were like, okay, let's, and so we worked together and we got the story to where it wasn't boring. And I could see their point, and it was a much better story for it. But initially they just dove right in with like, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. I'm like, you can tell a combat vet her PTSD story is wrong. Okay. Though that is a very long way of me saying, as we've said over and over and over again, don't broad brush anything. Okay.
Siera, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Janine, because you raised a very important point, and that is reader expectation and the face of PTSD. And y'all, this is in literature. The face of PTSD is usually white and male, not necessarily women or young women, old women, mature women, brown women, you name it. And so oftentimes when you do put yourself out there like Janine does, you can even get reader pushback, and you can be writing authentically, like you have lived this life. And so I would say, as a fellow writer who's worn the uniform, and heard a lot of the stereotypes that Miski also talked about, and that is just be ready, because your story that you've shared, Janine, I wrote about a woman in my debut novel, and she had PTSD, and it was the women who ripped me a new one. Literally, like I took quite a beating over what PTSD looked like from experience for my character, and giving those traits to my character. So that can still happen even when you're writing as authentically as you can. It doesn't mean that, readers have expectations, they have their own biases. Society has its own tropes that it's embraced, and what those look like, and who can have those attributes and who can't. Who's worthy of it, who's not, what it should look like, if you're allowed to even be that vulnerable. So I would say, yeah, as a writer, you can get pushback on your very authentic story. I'll stop there.
I want to say something to you, because I've been out since 1990. I was not diagnosed with PTSD and MST until 2020. 2019. I had a total meltdown in the train station, Penn Station here in Maryland. Don't lose touch with your group, because when we're busy and we're raising children and we're meeting the mission, what I learned was that your brain is so involved in all these other things, you don't even really realize that your responses are related to your PTSD, but other people do. And so this is why, movies and stories annoy me with the soldier that just got back and now he's shooting up the train station, because that's not really how it happens. You can go for years before your brain says, okay, now I have space to deal with this, and the real meltdown comes. So, thank you for sharing. And I hope by giving you a little part of me, it'll keep you from having that experience. Stay in touch with your group and your therapist. And quite frankly, some things just don't belong in books, unless it's nonfiction.
Rachel?
So, geez. First of all, I'm going to.
I'm not even sorry. I'm
gonna.
This is real talk. It needs to happen.
I'm gonna say 100%. That is absolutely 100% true. And you don't see it a lot because we haven't changed the narrative. And this is why I, as a writer and as an editor, I want more stories out there by veterans. And I want to read stories outside of these accepted mainstream narratives and tropes, because there's a wealth of information and stories that are waiting to be given voice to. And I 100% say, absolutely, yes, we absolutely do need more of this. we need more stories of how the injuries, not the mental injuries, the emotional injuries, but also just the physical injuries can affect somebody, both physically, yes, but also mentally. Minor traumatic brain injuries have long-lasting effects that aren't just headaches. They can present in a bunch of different ways. And that is a common injury in the military. You could turn your Humvee over, or you could have a bad landing after you jump out of an airplane. I've got a knee that just doesn't work the way it used to because I lost track of where the ground was. So yeah, there's that's something that I think does need to be understood. And like I said, it's one of the reasons why I do think that writers, military writers, need to be encouraged to write and to tell these stories. I also, there's another trope that just drives me completely freaking bonkers. And it is the poor person who joins the Army for money for college and gets totally exploited. And I'm like, let me sit you down.
What money for college?
Whoa. Hey, I got money I went to law school on the GI.
Okay.
There, right? I became a lawyer because of the Army. So
that's awesome.
It can be done.
I'm so happy for
the Marine
you.
Corps did send me to get a master's degree at Johns Hopkins University, but that came like 20 years in. So
right? Education is a great benefit. I've had the chance to get a bunch of really great education and to do that, but it wasn't the reason why I joined. And the reasons for joining, I think people often have more than one reason. And I've met very, very few people who who specifically said, I joined for college money, or I joined for this or that. Most people that I've talked to, and keep in mind, when I was a military journalist for 5 years, often when I'm interviewing somebody, I'll be like, so why did you join the Army? And so this is a very unscientific poll, but I'm speaking from some experience. A lot of people, this was right after 9/11, so patriotism, I want to join, I want to do my part. A lot of times I want to get some job skills, right? I wanted to join the military because maybe it's a family legacy. I want to get away from, my hometown, and I want to see the world, and I want to learn how to be a welder, or I want to learn how to do HR management, or I want to learn how to fly a plane. There's opportunities in the military that you just don't get anywhere else. Sometimes those opportunities come with combat deployment. So, let's not whitewash that at all. But you definitely can. You're going to find people who, when your characters join the military, why did they do it? And then why did they stay? What makes somebody stay for 20, 30 years in the military? I definitely was just going to do 4 years and gone. Right? I was like, let me do the reserves, because I'm not really sure if I'm going to want to do this military thing either full time or for a long time. Yeah, I just pulled my retirement packet because I was like, you know what? There's this really cool job that I might be able to do over here. So, yeah.
All right, Jack.
All right. Oh, okay. Bunch of stuff. One, thank you all for sharing all that. That's I don't know the words. I'm going to try to bring it a little lighter, though. I agree with Rachel where she's talking. There's multiple reasons. I come from a family that's all military, cops, firefighters, people I grew up with, same families. A lot of us went in the military for veteran status because it would help you become a firefighter, become a police officer. People wanted to travel. Patriotism was always in there, but yeah, there's a multitude of things. We didn't really touch a lot on what motivates the characters a lot. That reminded me that when guys sharing the stories, and talking about the PTSD with veterans, things along those lines. Just being in the service changes you, and that is something that you should incorporate into your character if your character is a veteran. When I went back in the Army, we went to Uzbekistan, K2, which so many people that serve there are coming down with all sorts of illnesses, sickness. It's like a 300% chance of getting cancer. It's all sorts of chemical toxins were there. But then we went to Pakistan. And when we deployed, this was at the beginning of 2002. So we were in Pakistan. We didn't have up-armored Humvees. We didn't have plates in our body armor. So I rotate back, and I'm with my wife, and we'll go places. And she'd start sighing when I was trying to get out of the car, and I couldn't figure out. I finally asked her. She goes, "You're driving me nuts." I go, "Why?" "Because you keep trying to get out of the car before the door locks disengage." And I didn't know I was doing it. And the reason being is you want to get as far away from the Humvee as possible when you parked because it wasn't armored. And it's little quirks like that that you pick up that you don't even know you're doing. And that is little things like that is a great way to incorporate your character, make them more three-dimensional, more realistic, instead of, oh, I have a machine gun. It humanizes the character. As to go back to the original question, I'm going to go with nomenclature. Know your nomenclature. Know it for the time period, the branch that you're in, because unless your character was in, World War I, World War II, or Korea, it's a fucking magazine, not a clip. So, know if your character is supposed to know this stuff, you should know it. It's one thing if it's some guy off the street that doesn't know any better, but if your character is an expert in something, make sure they're talking correctly, because any veteran or military member that reads that is going to pull them right out of the book. Yeah, that's all I got.
Jim, I have another thought here that I think might be worth, if someone's writing military science fiction, military fantasy, or just a military story. The military, and I'm talking all of the branches, DoD as a whole, has, as the years have gone on, become more inclusive as far as racial integration, gender integration, and then gender integration into combat coded MOSs. And that has been an upward trend since the military was founded. And so what's really interesting to me is when people choose to portray futuristic militaries, especially ones that have evolved from this current time period that we're in now, that fail to depict that trend of inclusiveness.
Mm.
And so I would just say, to people, keep that in mind. One of the reasons that integration has come about is because with a volunteer military force, we need to recruit as widely as possible. That's only one of the reasons why we're doing it. So when people are sitting there and they're building their world and they're figuring out how we're going to, who's going to be in the military, what that military is going to consist of, think about how many people you need to fight your war and where your military is going to pull those people from the general populace. And are you going to continue that trend, or is there a specific reason why you're not going to, and what in the history of your world changes that direction?
Well, I appreciate everybody taking the time to go through. I think we covered a lot of territory, definitely went very deep. And I appreciate everybody covering that tonight. Of course, appreciate everybody for your service. One of the things I think that everybody all should be aware of as well out there is a program called Hold On to the Light, which is a group of authors who have written about everything from PTSD, but it's all about fandom. It's authors, it's fans, it's creators, it's actors, have written hundreds of articles, and there's a great deal of positive mental health issues and stuff that has been covered through that series of articles. So I recommend go check out holdontothelight.com as well. But before we get out of here this evening, let's make sure everybody knows where to find you guys, websites, social media, that latest release that's coming up as well before we get out of here. So Rachel.
Absolutely. The easiest place to find all of the things that I am doing currently is Linktree/Rachel A. Brune. So LINKTR period EE/RACHELABRUNE. And you can find links to my socials, to my website, to the Crone Girls Press socials and website, and to my podcast On the Shelf.
Jack?
I'm Jack Cullen. I write an urban fantasy series called Recollections of a Rune Knight. It's about a hidden city, Massachusetts, where all the magic users and magic creatures hide out in between ages of magic and the police force that has to deal with them. I also just signed a 3-book deal with Evolve Publishing for a sci-fi action comedy called Locke Ferguson versus the Aliens. The first book, which is called Locke's Galactic Mess, will be out this September. I keep wanting to say December, but it's September. I can be found at jackcullenwrites.com and in various other media as Jack Cullen Books.
Miski?
Hi. The easiest way to find me is Linktree. Again, LINKTR period EE/Miski Harris. And from there, you can link to all of my social media sites, my website, my newsletter. And through those things, find out where I'm going to be next. I have, ironically, the next book in my military series, Don't Ask, Don't Tell, is called Damage Controlled. And it is due to debut June 1st. Lord willing, the creek don't rise and the plot bunnies don't go into hiding.
Siera?
All right, thanks. You can find me, probably the best way is at Sleek Bio /Siera London on social media. So SLEEK.bio/Siera London on social media. And that's Sierra with one R because I'm unique like that. And I have 33 books out, so plenty to keep you busy until my next release from Hachette Book Group, Fake It Until You Make It, which is April 23rd, I believe, 2024 is my next release.
Janine?
All right. So I am all over social media as at Janine K Spendlove. So I also just in my retirement launched a YouTube channel. So I know a lot of people do podcasts. I went the YouTube route, but it doesn't really feature much writing content. It's mostly sewing content and schooly conversion content. So during the interesting times we've recently had, I took up sewing as a hobby. So a lot of it there is vintage sewing and tutorials and things like that. My husband and I also bought a 40-foot school bus and are in the process of converting it into an RV, aka a schoolie. So there's a lot of that. I post a minimum weekly for long videos, and then I have a lot of shorter videos that show different things. I'm very active on Instagram as well. I do have a website, but my website, JanineSpendlove.com, is really just a landing point for you to see what I've written. And if you can't remember any of this, you can always Google Marine who wrote Star Wars, and it'll probably show my StarWars.com interview, and then you'd be like, okay, that's her name again. But Spendlove is a pretty memorable, if you put in Spendlove author or Spendlove writer in Google, it'll probably pop up with me. Again, I don't have anything, everything I've written recently has all been nonfiction, scholarly stuff in various scholarly journals, under my married name. Spendlove is actually my birth name. So it's been very handy. I use that for all my fiction writing, and then all my other writing, is under my married name. So, but I did write that military sci-fi, Pride and Prejudice retelling. So I'm just going to say it one last time. If there are any agents or presses who would like to get a look at it, please hit me up. JanineKSpendlove@gmail.com is also how you can reach me.
And go ahead, Jack.
I just forgot. I just got to do a shout out. I got to, say hi to my nephews, Jordan and John, who are both currently serving in the U.S. Army.
Hooah.
And I've had the pleasure of being your host tonight, Jim Nettles, and you can find me at jamespnettles.com, authoressentials.net, authoressentialsworkshops.com, the Speculative Fiction Academy.com, creatingprose.com, and here at ConTinual. And we will see you guys again next time.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.